The Russia-Ukraine war has reached dimensions the Russian occupiers did not anticipate. The Ukrainian army continues to defeat the invaders in many occupied territories. The Russian army has become unable to resist the losses of military personnel and ammunition, while the intensity of the war is spread to strategic areas. The Ukrainian army cornered the Russian occupiers with its successful attacks. The developments in Crimea over the past day have once again demonstrated the determination of the Ukrainian leader Zelensky, his army and the Ukrainian people to achieve victory. Crimea is undoubtedly the lifeblood of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The unjust occupation of Crimea by Russian leader Vladimir Putin in 2014 was a precursor to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Putin, who occupied Crimea, had started building the Kerch Brigade very soon after the invasion to be able to ship ammunition and troops from Russia during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Kerch Brigade was built in 2018 and Putin felt he was ready to take over Ukraine. However, Putin faced many unforeseen developments and failed to achieve success against Ukraine. The Ukrainian army became a nightmare for the Russian invaders in the Zonkui Crimea. The Russian army encountered an unexpected development while delivering Kalibr missiles to the occupied territories. The delivery convoy was hit by the Ukrainian army while moving along the railroad supply line. The Russian army's ammunition stocks were running out, suffered a major setback with this attack. The Russian invaders were using the railway in the city of Jankoy as a supply line. The Ukrainian army planned an operation to destroy this supply line, as the Ukrainian army does in every operation it invaded for the most opportune moment. The opportune moment was when the delivery vehicles were passing through the supply line, because in this way, both the Russian invaders' ammunition stockpile would be blown up and the supply bed would be destroyed. The Ukrainian army used kamikaze drones for this attack. The drones are known for detonating warheads the moment they hit their target. Unlike other drones, they detonate themselves when they reach the target. For this reason, kamikaze drones are also called suicide drones. The occupation convoy and the supply line was carrying Kalibr cruise missiles when the kamikaze drone hit this delivery convoy. There were explosions. The cruise missiles in the delivery convoy exploded. The intensity of the explosion increased along with the exploded delivery vehicles. The railway supply line used by the invaders in the jungle was also destroyed. The Ukrainian army destroyed multiple targets in an attack. The Russian army lost both the Kalibr cruise missiles and the supply line. The General Intelligence Department of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine shared information about the operation in the Jankoy. The statement made by the intelligence services as follows: "The mysterious explosion continues Russia's disarmament process and prepares Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula for liberation from occupation." The explosion, which occurred in the city of the Jankoy in the north of temporarily occupied Crimea, destroyed the Kalibr anti-cruise missiles while they were being transported on the railroad. Ukrainian intelligence also said that the cruise missiles were intended for use by submarines of the Russian fleet. The events in the Jankoy are not limited to this. The Ukrainian army also successfully shut down Iranian-made drones flown by the Russian occupiers in the Jankoy. The Crimean town of the Jankoy has been a target of the Ukrainian army since the beginning of the Russian occupation of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army has carried out so many attacks in this region that the Russian occupiers started digging trenches in the Jankoy because they had lost their control in the region. There was even an advertisement in the region for personnel to dig trenches. Thus, they considered blocking the ground operations of the Ukrainian army, but they did not take into account the Ukrainian Air Force. The Ukrainian Air Force destroyed the drones of the Russian invaders. It detected in the Jankoy with armed unmanned aerial vehicles. Russian sources commented on the attack. Russian media reported a total of 8 explosions in the Jankoy. It was stated that Iranian-made drones belonging to Russian invaders were seen in the skies over Jankoy before the explosion. Images of these explosions became a hot topic on social media. The Russian armed forces suffered huge losses both on the ground and in the air in Crimea. The Crimean Peninsula is the most critical region in the Russia-Ukraine war. Consequently, Ukrainian leader Zelensky said that the Russian-Ukrainian war will continue until the day Crimea is taken. It is now clear that Crimea is the target of the Ukrainian army. This is because the Ukrainian army has managed to repel most of the invaders in the occupied territories. After these successes, says it is not a turn for the military points on Russian territory in Crimea, which was unjustly annexed in 2014. The Ukrainian army is getting stronger every day since Russian leader Vladimir Putin began his occupation of Ukraine. Certain European countries have provided significant military assistance to the Ukrainian army. The United States is at the forefront of this aid. The U.S. government added a new one to this aid. The other day, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken gave information about the content of the new military aid package provided to Ukraine. According to Blinken's statement, the 34th aid packages provided by the U.S. to the Ukrainian army include 55mm squared howitzers, HARM radar missiles, HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems, ammunition for Bradley, infantry, fighting vehicles, river patrol boats, anti-tank weapons, and other equipment. Antony Blinken also congratulated the 50 countries that have provided military aid packages to Ukraine in defense of its territorial integrity and sovereignty. In announcing the aid package for Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken said that for the Russian-Ukrainian war to end, Putin must give up his decision to invade. He said that as long as the war continues, the United States will stand by Ukraine. Blinken's statement is as follows: only Russia can end the war today. Until Russia does, we will stand with Ukraine no matter how long it takes. On the same day that the United States announced its military aid package, the European Union also gave information about the new support to be provided to the Ukrainian army. Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Policy and Security Policy, made a statement on his social media account about the content of the new aid package to be provided to Ukraine. Borrell tweeted as follows: a historic decision. Following my proposal, member states agreed to deliver 1 round of artillery ammunition within the next 12 months. We have a 3-track approach: €1 billion for immediate delivery, €1 billion for joint procurement commission to ramp up production capacity. The Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger day by day with the support of Western European countries, is fighting a historic struggle against the Russian army. As the Ukrainian army is getting stronger, the Russian army is getting closer to the end every day. This is evident by the fact that Russian attacks are decreasing while Ukrainian attacks are exceeding the occupied territories. Do you think the Russian army will be able to continue the war? What are your thoughts on the Ukrainian offensive in the city of Dizhonkoy? With Putin, who is being cornered day by day, be able to solve the problem of military personnel and ammunition? In the war between nations, a single strategic move can change the course of the entire war. Ukraine's Azov Regiment, Kraken's Special Forces have this skill and proved it the other day. A group of Kraken's Special Forces soldiers, equipped with very special abilities, succeeded in destroying the cross-border Russian observation tower in a legendary operation. How did this happen? Despite the huge defensive line the Russian army has set up along its western borders, the effects of the war in Ukraine continue to enslave Russian lands. Day by day, the Ukrainian armed forces and intelligence special units began to focus on cross-border operations on the way to freedom struggles during this critical period of the war. Critical places such as Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, and Voronezh were among the Russian cities most targeted by the Ukrainians. In particular, the Soviet-era jet-powered unmanned aerial vehicles in the Ukrainian army literally started a new era in targeting Russian soil. This is because it's estimated that the range of these drones exceed 800 kilometers, and some types even exceed 1,000 kilometers. This impressive range gives the Ukrainian military a very broad attack perspective. This being the case, Ukrainian forces are able to conduct dramatic offensive operations even across the border, which may worry the Russians. The last cross-border operation of the Ukrainian forces was now seen as the beginning of the end for the Moscow administration. The target this time was the Russian city of Bryansk for cross-border operations. A well-known special and elite unit in the Ukrainian armed forces took action. This unit was known as the Kraken Regiment of the Ukrainian Army. The Kraken Regiment was a Ukrainian special military volunteer unit formed on February 24, 2022, the same day that the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. It is this elite military group that recently launched a striking cross-border offensive operation in the Russian city of Bryansk. Kraken, the special unit of the Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, successfully destroyed the Grenadier Autonomous Watchtower in the Bryansk Oblast of Russia. Perhaps this offensive operation was one of the most resonant examples since the beginning of the war. The statement that followed the attack proved the success of the Kraken Regiment, making the announcement on Telegram channels. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine announced that the intelligence forces of the Kraken Special Unit destroyed the Russian Grenadier Autonomous Observation Tower in Bryansk Oblast using a kamikaze drone. The official announcement of the striking step of this elite union created a bombshell effect on the world agenda because the Moscow administration was already exposed to a lot of criticism in the face of the serious failure of the Russian army on the territory of Ukraine as the effects of the war penetrated from the borders of Russia to the interior of the country. Both Russian citizens panicked, and the Russian administration realized much more clearly that the war was not just an issue on Ukrainian soil. In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces have repeatedly targeted Russian territory since the beginning of the war. If you remember, it was recently reported that explosions were heard near a military airbase used by Moscow forces near the border with Ukraine during the critical time period when reports of Ukrainian UAVs passing through Russian territory were multiplying. Ukrainian Internal Affairs Advisor Anton Gerashenko has published photos of violent explosions near Yeysk Air Base in the Krasnodar region, about 80 miles from the front line in Ukraine. However, according to the Russian news agency RIA, the local administration of the Yeysk district of the region denied that a fire broke out near the airport, describing such reports as provocation by the head of the region, Roman Bublik, stating that planned military tactical exercises were held in the region. Bublik explained that news on social media that the residents of the region were evacuated did not reflect the truth. These statements, however, did not match Russian Defense Ministry accusations that Ukraine used drones to target infrastructure inside Russia because the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that Ukrainian UAVs attempted an attack in Krasnodar. It seems that the head of the region, Roman Bublik, tried to hide the attacks on Russian soil and wanted to prevent an atmosphere of panic in the country. But in a short time, the cross-border operations of the Ukrainian army were learned by the entire Russian people. At present, most of the Russian citizens are against this war, especially with these striking cross-border offensive operations of the Ukrainian forces. The Russians were both socio-psychologically devastated by the effects of this war, and the anti-war population in the country was increasing rapidly. On the other hand, right after the news and statements regarding the drone attacks that took place in Krasnodar, a fire broke out after two explosions in an oil depot in the city of Tortosa in southern Russia. According to the statement shared by the Russian city government officials, the fire engulfed the annex building of the warehouse next to the military barracks and owned by the Russian oil company Rosneft. The head of the Republic, Murat Kamalov, reported that an unidentified plane crashed in the Russian Republic of Adygea, about 100 miles away on the same night. What was going on in Russia? The news of successive attacks and unmanned aerial vehicles flying over the Russian skies brought the tension in the country to its peak. In addition to all these news of the attack, Belgorod Mayor Valentin Demidov announced that the wreckage of 3 drones was found in Belgorod, Russia, but no injuries were reported. Valentin Demidov, who stated that the situation did not involve much danger, did not want to alarm the residents. But the offensive fire in Belgorod continued to spread towards other cities of Russia. Ukraine's UAV army was on its way rapidly. This time, the stop was again a critical region of Russia. The governor of the region, Andrei Vorobayev, said in a statement that a drone crashed near the village of Gorbatov in the Moscow region, about 400 miles from the border with Ukraine. It was learned that the UAV was located next to the Voskresensk gas compressor station, which belongs to Russia's energy giant Gazprom. After all these attacks, the governors of the Kursk and Belgorod regions on the border with Ukraine repeatedly accused the Ukrainian armed forces of bombing the border. However, Mikhailo Podolyak, one of the advisors to President Vladimir Zelensky, denied that Ukraine was carrying out attacks on Russian soil and declared that it was waging a defensive war to save all of Kiev's lands from occupation. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that he did not believe Mikhailo Podolyak's statements between the height of the bombing and sabotage reports. Russia's border areas have become increasingly volatile since Moscow's attempt to control Ukraine a year ago in what it called a special military operation on this issue. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, in his speech on television, stated that the Ukrainians will not achieve anything and that these cross-border operations will have no effect. After Putin's statements in two videos circulating on the internet, gunmen calling themselves the Russian Volunteer Union claimed that they had crossed the Russian border to fight Putin and the administration they called the Kremlin regime. These men, who described themselves as Russian liberators, urged the Russians to take up arms and rise up against the authorities. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Putin had been briefed on this by security chiefs. The tension was again about to push Russia to the brink of serious chaos. In fact, all this seemed like a rather strange story. The Ukrainians said that this group was not them, but the Russians claimed that this group, called the Russian Volunteer Union, was made up of Ukrainians. Russian military analyst Pavel Felgenhauer stated that there are reports of Ukrainian spies and agents being arrested and armed in different places. So sabotage groups such as the Russian Volunteer Unit could carry out such actions, so to speak. If these allegations are confirmed, and considering that all these cross-border operations are carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces, we will understand more clearly that the rules of war have changed. In short, the Russians not only have to fight on the territory of Ukraine, but now the borders of Russia and many cities of the country are in danger due to the offensive operations of the Ukrainian army. Currently, there are striking findings that most of these attacks that took place in Russian cities were signed by the Ukrainian army. Although the increase in these cross-border operations signed by the Ukrainian army is not a vital problem for the Russians at the moment, such actions may even cause the war to end in a moment, because the possible total revolt of Russian citizens on this issue may pose a serious danger. It should never be forgotten that popular revolt can cause even impossible events to happen. The Russians conducted yet another massive missile strike in an attempt to shut down the Ukrainian energy system. What is interesting is that this is the second time in a row that the Russians launched only around 70 rockets. This is almost 2 times less than they had been using in autumn, as you remember. The weakness of the previous strike was explained by the fact that Ukrainian forces struck Russian airfields several hours prior to the launch of the rockets. But this time no such preventative action took place. So the weakness of this missile strike indicates that Russian airfields indeed suffered a lot, which explains why they started using aircraft that they had never used before. This is also the first time that one of the missiles they launched never even made it to Ukraine and crashed on Russian territory. They have 101 rocket fell in the Volgograd region. The locals said that they saw the rockets passing by in this region, and apparently one of them fell in the Yelin district. Overall, the Russians have launched 76 missiles, while Ukrainian air defense intercepted 60 missiles, which implies an 80% success rate. Ukrainian defense minister stated that the effectiveness of Ukrainian air defense increased by 30% since this missile strikes began, which is quite a lot. He said that it increased from 50% at the beginning of the war to 80% in December. According to the minister, Ukraine used a combination of the air defense systems donated by the partners, Soviet-era systems, and repurposed mobile machine guns. And when it comes to the donations made by the Western partners, U.S. officials stated that the Pentagon is finalizing plans to send Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. Russian representatives once again responded to this announcement with threats, specifically saying that this would make them seen as aggressors in Russia, which would result in unknown consequences. Pentagon press secretary responded to the threats, saying that it is ironic that Russia is referring to a donation of air defense systems with the purpose of defending civilian infrastructure as aggression. Joe Biden also commented on that by saying that they will continue to support Ukraine. But judging by the decreased intensity of these missile strikes, the biggest problem for the Russians is not Ukrainian air defense. The biggest problems are internal. Today, the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force stated that Russia launched Tu-95 seconds from Engels airfield for the first time. He said in an interview that the Russians used everything they had except for Iranian kamikaze drones. They raised to 95 Su-35 and MiG-31, which has never happened before. The Russians understand that with fewer rockets, the chances of overwhelming Ukrainian air defense are very low. That is why, in order to compensate for the decreased number of launches, the Russians tried to concentrate their efforts on only 3 regions: Kiev, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia. Out of 76 missiles, around 40 targeted Kiev, 15 targeted Dnipro and Zaporizhia, and 10 targeted Kharkiv. The main idea of hitting Kiev is to destroy all thermal power plants and cause a prolonged and freezing blackout to raise public discontent, which would create internal pressure on Zelensky to negotiate. The main idea of hitting Kharkiv is to worsen Ukrainian logistics that heavily rely on electric trains. And given that Kharkiv is one of the main hubs of Ukrainian forces, the impact is definitely being felt. The main idea of hitting Zaporizhia and Dnipro is to prevent the Ukrainians from concentrating a critical amount of forces in this region that would allow them to take offensive actions. That is why they are targeting here not only power plants and substations, but also crucial railway connections. Overall, the Russians failed to inflict significant damage, even though the Ukrainian energy system suffered a lot during these 3 months. The blackouts today were very mild. Mild missile strikes are also working in favor of Ukrainian air defense as it does not get overwhelmed, which means that the system learns better and ensures an even higher success rate in the future. In response to the Russian missile strike, Western partners announced another help package in an attempt to restore damage to Ukrainian energy facilities and boost its air defense.